Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking specifically about KeyForge and the challenges of making an intellectual property leap. All right, so what do I mean by that? So specifically, it is my distinct belief that KeyForge is an intellectual property container, that it was built to be an intellectual property container. So if you look at KeyForge and you look at the Crucible is where the archons exist and where they bring most of their power. And the idea is that specifically they're there and they can bring these different factions there, and then those factions fight for the archons, right? Specifically to get these keys so that they can open up vaults that are on Crucible. All right? Excuse me. Now, basically, all that's going on, and right out of the gate in the first edition, the first set of KeyForge, the Archons have 7 factions that fight for them. I have a mnemonic that helps me remember all the KeyForge houses. Dis Shadow of this untamed Brobnar holding this Mars logo prompts me to seek Sanctum. All right, so you have Dis and Shadow, you have Untamed and Brobnar, you have Mars and Logos, and you have Sanctum, right? And that's 7 distinct houses, 7 factions that are fighting for the Archons, okay? All right, now, so Crucible is a big clue that KeyForge is an intellectual property holder, and then additionally, Mars is a big clue. So Mars is little green men the way we think of Mars, Mars aliens in the 50s, right? And that's a big deal because it kind of calls out a recognition of Earth, right? Which is really odd because Sanctum doesn't really do that, nor does Dish or Shadow. Logos a little bit, but generally, kind of calling out that Earth exists within your fictional world is odd, especially when you're dealing with any kind of a fantasy world, right? Which there's supposed to be fantasy elements within KeyForge, so it's very unusual. All right, so it is my distinct belief that KeyForge is an intellectual property container, and that FFG intends to bring in additional intellectual properties, right? So how would that look? Okay, well, in an ideal world for FFG, they would have one property they would have a House Marvel, a House DC, a House Harry Potter, a House Star Wars, and a House Pokemon, right? And all these creatures from all these intellectual properties would be, creatures and beings and entities would be equipment and locations and all this kind of stuff would be serving the Archons, right, as factions, just the way houses do, right? Now, what I just talked about would be utterly impossible. It could not be done. And the reason why is so let's talk about the intellectual properties I just named. These are the 5, to my knowledge, the 5 most valuable intellectual properties on the planet: Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Pokemon, and Harry Potter. There's nothing greater. By the way, if you want to know the real value of an intellectual property, what has a theme park? That whatever has a theme park, there's real money behind that, right? So every single one of those is connected to a theme park in one way or another, right? So basically, this is where we start talking about the challenges of the intellectual property container. So basically, what KeyForge is trying to do is incredibly difficult to build one product that can hold multiple intellectual properties. Now, here's the thing. It's incredibly difficult, right? But the reason why I think why Fantasy Flight Games is going to try to go down this road is it can be incredibly profitable, right? For everybody involved. For the intellectual property holder, for FFG, and it can even be quite enjoyable for the people who are on the other side of it. Now, there are some serious intellectual property containers right now that mix major intellectual property, different intellectual properties under one roof. The biggest one right now that I can think of is Funko. So Funko routinely deals with different intellectual property holders, and that's a big deal, right? It's really considerably significant, right? So with all that going on, you have these intellectual properties. So one of the things is the reason why Fantasy Flight Games could never get Marvel, DC, Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Pokemon is there's different companies that own those properties, and they're so large, they have significant beef with each other. They step on each other's toes frequently, and they're not going to want to be under one roof. Now, granted, I think every single one of those is already under the roof at Funko. Funko is incredibly rare, and they're one of the groups that have been able to do the best job of making IPs survive under one roof together, right? But I don't think FFG can make that happen. It'd be too challenging, right? So they're going to have to determine what intellectual property will come into future expansions of KeyForge, if any. Now, I'm going to say, I truly believe from the gate, KeyForge was built to be an intellectual property container, but the reason why FFG did not declare that was because they were right to not declare it. And the reason why was nobody knew if KeyForge would work, right? Now, at this point, KeyForge is working. It's selling out at many FLGSs. There's absolutely an interest in the game. People are playing it. They're playing it robustly. The game is growing. You know, it's a proven product at this point, right? But but KeyForge was doing a lot. It was launching a new product. That's difficult. It was launching an entirely new genre of products, unique deck games. That's incredibly difficult. And it was going head to head in competition with Magic the Gathering. That was difficult. And then also it had one specific goal that it needed to achieve as well. It had multiple goals, but it had a very high-end specific goal that I think Richard Garfield had in mind, which to kill the net deck. And I think really it's done a good job of that. Like in Fantasy Flight Game, in KeyForge, you get to play decks that are unique. You never have to play a mirror match. You don't have to play you don't have to play against the deck that you literally made last week because somebody bought it. That's really special, right? So basically I would say there's a 10% possibility that KeyForge will never go to being an intellectual property container, even though it was meant to do that from the very beginning. And the reason why is FFG could say, hey, we have killed the net deck. This is a truly awesome product. We have a successful game. Let's not muck it up by bringing intellectual properties in. I'd say there's about a 10% chance of that. However, there is very significant probability that they will bring in intellectual properties. I think it's about a 90% probability that they will bring it in the. I don't think they're going to bring it in the next set. I think they're going to bring it in probably in late 2019, maybe early 2020 set. Okay, and so. But when they do that, they have some serious problems to deal with. So one, they need to see if they can get one of the top 5. They need to see if they can get Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Harry Potter, or Pokemon. All those brands are challenging to get, right? And especially on a product like this, because they protect their brand and they want to be careful as they move forward. And all of those brands know that if, every single one of those brands knows if you sign on with Fantasy Flight Games, you are cutting off your ability, you're doing something, you are lowering the probability that you're going to be able to successfully do business with Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast just signed a very lucrative deal with Transformers, and I think that's all under one house. Hasbro has Transformers, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast, right? But Transformers just made a collectible card game, right? So basically, if Marvel or DC or Harry Potter or Star Wars or Pokemon make a deal with FFG, that's going to be seen as a problematic from the perspective of WotC, who's one of the biggest game makers in the world, right? They have a level of product ability to create product that no other company has. So that is one of the challenges. The other challenge is, if you can't get if you get one of the big 5, you're good to go. You can make 5 houses easily out of any one of those, done and done, right? And so you're set for at least one set. You might be set for like 3 or 4 or 5 sets, right? So basically you have that done, right? But what if you have to take a lower property? Now this gets really sticky, because if you have to go with a lower end property, not one of the big 5 intellectual properties, then there's a question of, is this property even big enough to bring traffic to our game? That's one of the great things about all of the intellectual property, the big 5 intellectual properties that are all talked about. They are so popular, they're guaranteed they're going to bring new fans to your game, because those properties are way more famous and way more popular than your game, right? But when you start dealing with smaller ones, like here's a good one, Stranger Things, right? Netflix, they've got money, they want to start promoting their own brands. Stranger Things is a Netflix original, right? It seems like, I think Stranger Things would be a really good fit as as an expansion, right? And you could easily get 7 houses out of what's in Stranger Things. But once you do that, it brings up the question: hey, is Stranger Things actually more famous than KeyForge, right? And the reality is, it's never been a movie. I don't think there are many. There might be 1 or 2 Stranger Things games, but there's not a lot of narrative products that have come out of Stranger Things, right? So it's a challenging one, and it's not guaranteed to bring a large flow of new customers to your product. And that's the whole point of these intellectual properties, is they're supposed to have more fame than your product has, and give you a genuine advantage. That's a very distinct, that's something that you need to do. That's exactly what an intellectual property is for. That's the only thing it's for. Is it going to give me what I need from the perspective of this, of new customers, right? So in Stranger Things, I don't think it would do it, right? So once you have you can't get the big 5, and you're dealing with smaller properties that you're not even sure are going to bring you new customers, you got a real problem, right? Because you're like, what was the point of doing this IP? It was supposed to flow new customers to our product, right? So one of the things you could do is, and so especially if you bring like Stranger Things and people are like, I don't like Stranger Things, then you're done. Nobody's going to pick up that expansion, or a very small amount of people are going to pick up that expansion, and you got a serious problem with one of your sets, right? Now, I do think Magic the Gathering dealt with this, where they had one set in particular that just did abysmally. It was ironically called Fallen Empires. But I think, overall the game industry has more ability to bounce back from that type of problem, but it can be a significant problem. It can really interrupt the momentum. So how do they deal with that? So one of the things that I think that they might deal with that is, instead of bringing in one tiny property, you can bring in multiple tiny properties all at once into one expansion, right? So for example, one of the things they could do is they could bring in all at once. They could bring in Star Trek, Digimon, Clue, right? Right. So people will be like, oh, Star Trek. Well, I'm not a Star Trek fan. Oh, but are you a Digimon fan? Oh, you're not a Digimon fan? Well, what about Clue? Right? And when the nice thing, and like people are like, what? Why are you talking about Clue? Right? So one, Clue is an intellectual property, and it's not an insignificant one. It had a famous movie, and they keep making new Clue games even today, and it's iconic. People know it, right? So, and the other thing is, the nice thing about Clue is it would bring in people that didn't know Digimon or didn't know specifically Star Trek. So that could be one way to approach this intellectual property container challenge, and making the intellectual property leap, is you could bring in 3 small IPs at once, right? And hit it and so then people are kind of, rather than being disappointed, they can be delighted by any one of those IPs, right? And so, and then you bring them all to one expansion and then roll it out that way. So I think that's one way that they can handle the challenges of the intellectual property leap, right? But overall, I really think that this is probably a big point of discussion within FFG. I think they're probably hustling right now to see what properties they can get, how they're going to attach them to KeyForge, and also, just to be clear, there are a lot of companies that are doing this well. There are some companies that are doing a great job of combining intellectual properties, and I think KeyForge naturally does it. So that's my take. I definitely think there are some serious challenges to making the intellectual property leap, but I think that FFG is going to work very, very hard on it, because there's a lot of money to be made, and then you have the future of the game where you can bring in whatever property is hot, right? And that can be exciting. It can be exciting for people who are buying it. It can be exciting for the intellectual property holders, and it can be exciting for FFG as a game distributor. So that's my thought on some of the challenges for the intellectual property leap. I'm really curious what you think. Please consider liking and subscribing. Take care. Have a good day.